And I hope we are all comfortable with that. Thank you. This webinar is one of series of activities that we are organizing under the Ghana project. For NetRight, because we are a gender equality and women's rights network, our focus on this project is from a gender perspective. So that's the value that we add to the project that is being organized throughout the in some countries in Africa. We are looking at it from a gender perspective. We've already have some activities, an inception meeting, forum, which most of you were in that meeting. We've also had trainings for journalists, 25 journalists coming from across Ghana, and also for 50 CSOs, the 50 CSOs also building their capacity on tax justice tax issues from a gender perspective. One of the things of this project is to train tax champions, or to get tax champions that would actively engage in tax issues from a gender perspective. So if there are tax issues, normally we hear TUC and others coming on board to share their views, but we don't get the gender dimensions of the issues that are being discussed. The project not only look at tax issues, but it go on to also look at issues around illicit financial flows, which is of course connected to taxation, and then domestic resource mobilization. So within the 3-year period, these are some of the things that we would explore. This webinar today, as I mentioned, is looking at gender, class, and taxation. And we have experts here to do that for us. So I wouldn't go into that. I will leave that for the experts to discuss. But our moderator this morning is our own colleague, Shamima Muslim. Shamima is a development communication specialist and a gender and social inclusion advocate. She's a former broadcast journalist. I think if you are a journalist, you're always a journalist.
Always a journalist.
I'll take, it's like trade unions. Once a trade union, you're always a trade union. So I'll take the former out. She's a journalist and the founder of Alliance for Women in Media Africa. Shamima, I welcome you to this webinar, and I hand over to you. Shamima will introduce the speakers that we have for this meeting. So Shamima, I hand over to you. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you very much, Madam Patricia Blankson-Akapo. And thank you all for joining us on this very important conversation around taxation and the gendered perspective. It will surprise you a lot of the elements that would emerge from the conversations we'll be having with our speakers, just so we are aware of all the ways in which our current tax system affects the most vulnerable in our society, people who are already vulnerable, women especially, and how that also in turn affects the economic base of our country. So thank you once again for joining us. I'm going to quickly, briefly go through and introduce our speakers for today, and we'll jump straight ahead. You'll be hearing from Dr. Kojo Opoku. He's a member of, he joined CSPS in August 2019, prior to which he worked as an economist at the Bank of Ghana. Dr. Opoku has also consulted for international organizations, including the World Bank Group and UNICEF Ghana. He has presented research papers in international conferences, including Center for Studies of African Economies, Development Conference in Oxford University, and UNU wider conferences. He will be speaking on taxation in Ghana's informal economy, challenges, opportunities, and policy implications. He is a fellow at the Center for Social Policy Studies, University of Ghana. We would also be hearing from Dr. Kobina Nyakun Otu. He works with the Trades Union Congress, TUC, and has been instrumental in formulating the policy positions of the TUC Ghana and in response to economic and social policies of the Ghanaian government. He works closely with ITUC Africa, assisting the regional organization in research and policy engagement at regional and international levels. Between 2010 and 2011, he worked with the World Bank as labor market specialist, having been seconded by the ITUC. He would also be speaking on the labor perspectives. Last but certainly not the least, we'll be listening to the only female speaker this morning, Adjoa Adobia Owusu. Adjoa Adobia Owusu is currently an investigative reporter with the Fourth Estate. We all know the great works the Fourth Estate is doing in uncovering corruption and graft in our society. Right, of the Media Foundation for West Africa. At the Fourth Estate, she has produced some impactful reports. Some of her stories have saved the country from losing billions of dollars. Adjoa has also exposed corruption in the health and education sector. Before MFWA engagement, she was a broadcast journalist as well with the Media General Group, one of Ghana's leading media conglomerates. So with that, she would also be speaking on the gender perspectives in tax justice issues. So let's welcome our first speaker, Dr. Kojo Opoku, economist and research fellow, Center for Social Policy Studies, University of Ghana. He will speak on taxation in Ghana's informal economy, challenges, opportunities, and policy implications. Let me also just add that the chat box is opened, as in when you have any questions, contributions, please feel free to put them on so we can follow the train of issues and concerns, and the speakers can always come to those questions as well, so you don't also lose your train of thoughts. Thank you very much. So yes, Doc, over to you. Dr. Opoku.
Doc, please unmute yourself. You are muted. And you can also put on your video if you have a good internet connectivity.
Yeah. It's good to see you.
Okay. All right. Please, can you hear me?
Loud and clear from my side, yes.
Thank you very much. Let me try to see if I can share my screen. Okay. Thank you very much. So as I said, I'm sharing a short talk on gender lens for tax policy implication of electronic levy in Ghana. So many a times we do policy, and one of the main policy, when you talk of public policy, we have social policy and economic policy. And in the economic policy, one key tool is fiscal policy, where taxation is very, very important, or fiscal policy, taxation and expenditure. Then taxation is very, very important in the sense that for you to a country to sustainably reduce poverty, and also ensure sustainable growth, it needs to sustainably raise adequate tax revenues. And the revenues for infrastructure, you can do it also for redistribution, even things that the inequalities that exist in the economy. You can also use tax tools, the tax that you raise. You can redistribute in a way to solve those kind of inequities that have generated all those kind of inequalities in the economy. But in doing so, in the attempt to raise revenue, we also know that gender equality remains critical development goal of any government policy. And so you don't want to, in an effort to raise revenue, you don't want to do things that will negatively affect the effort that you have already made in terms of achieving gender equality. Then when you talk of taxation, how do we find gender in it? You can have two ways of gender bias in our tax system. One is explicit, and that one you can usually get it through personal income tax. When you say personal income tax, it is those who are working. When you work, at the end of the month or the year, when you get your income, you are supposed to pay a portion of it on your as tax to the government. And that is what you call personal income tax. And when there's a explicit bias system, which currently in Ghana, we don't have it, and many African countries don't have it, is in a way when you explicitly say that when you are a female, this is how much a woman worker who has earned interest, this is how much you are going to tax her on an income. When you are a male, this is how much you are going to tax you. We don't have that in Ghana, so there is kind of equality on that ground. Then there is also implicit bias of tax system. And the tax system, there is no explicitly, the law, you don't see any kind of bias against any gender. But when it comes to the implementation, and due to differences in life cycle, how men and women behave along the life cycle. So you can get men, a man and a woman, they are both working in the same company. And because of their life cycle, differences in their life cycle, it will get to a point the woman has to stop working and probably even go to informal because of maybe difficulties in combining childcare with full-time employment and all those guys. So they are behavioral. So in some Asia countries, you can really see M-curve. We call it M-curve in the labor market participation, where at the initial stage of a woman's life, he's in the labor market, then getting to some stage, it peaks and they start dropping out of the labor force to give birth. Then after giving birth, they go back again to the labor market. So you could really see that in places where the labor market is very fluid. But of course, in Ghana, it's difficult because once you leave, it's usually difficult to come back. Then also we have social arrangements that has actually, in terms of gender differences in social arrangement, where jobs that different class and different gender groups do, and also economic behavior, which kind of activities or goods that women and men they buy. So all these things, we don't consider it in terms of taxation. I mean, designing a tax policy, but in terms of after we have made a law and implementing it, because of these differences, it end up affecting the tax system, end up creating some bias and difference in terms of its effect on different gender groups. So you could see, for example, if you are in an economic environment where there is a high VAT rate, and probably we also have presumptive self-employed tax, where instead of a highly progressive income taxes, if you have a high VAT rate like that, it can be a burdensome for some women due to their low income. Remember, women are more likely to be in the self-employed tier of work, and not even the high end, the low end tier of self-employment. And the VAT rate is high. So whatever they buy from the market, it is getting a high tax value. And when it comes to people who are being employed, they are not who are usually men in the formal sector. Many of them, you don't get that kind of progressive in nature. Even for property ownership, you go to many places, the high-end places, locations in Ghana, you can see, you go to East Legon, you go to Trazak, all those places, right? You could see that the properties, many of them are owned by men. But we don't have a progressive income tax like property tax. And we end up bringing more indirect taxes like VAT and those things that really affect women more than men. But if you were to choose the progressive one, which the property tax, all those things, then you can actually get a progressive tax system, which is what every good tax system has. And we see the women have low income and they suffer more when there's no progressivities in tax income, is because one, there are discrimination in labor market. In many places, we may not have it openly, but women may be discriminated when it comes to employment, the opportunities to work in the formal sector, in the banking sector. We hear all those kind of things in the system, and a lot of research in other places have proved that. And also, there are differences in educational achievement. Of course, in recent times, there are a lot, especially in tertiary education, there are a lot of improvement in terms of gender equality, but much of our history says that women usually lag behind in terms of educational achievement. And this also generate, even when they are employed in the same organization, they earn less. So when the income tax is not progressive, but VAT rate and indirect taxes are high, it actually negatively affects them. But in discussing all these things, we need to also consider from economic point of view, the efficiency in favor of VAT over income tax still remains. So these are distributional effect after the tax implementation, the regressivity, how it affects people differently. These are distributional effect of tax system. Then also have efficiency. When we say that, oh, if that is the case, let's just take away VAT system if VAT is not working. But in economics, we say VAT is efficient. It's a broad base and it affects everybody. You don't want a tax system. You want a tax system that is neutral. You don't want that affects some people. And inefficiency is said that if you put too much tax on formal sector, it has the ability to push people into the informal sector where the productivity level is low, and you can't actually monitor them. You can't see them. So you push more people into it. So you actually reduce tax, you reduce growth and everything. And so you don't want that to remain. So when we are considering this distributional effect in the tax system, we need to also consider the efficiency terms which favor VAT. VAT is very efficient than income tax. Now let's look at e-levy policy in Ghana, which is a form of transactions tax that was introduced in 2022. And currently it has a levy of 1% on electronic transfer. And there are exemptions that has implications on people who are operating in informal sector, people who are that is the informal sector, the social class, the people with different economic status and gender. And so the exemptions, we have 100 cedis per day when you do your transaction through mobile money. And there's another exemptions which people do not talk to it much, which I believe it was very discriminatory. And that is 20,000 per day on internet banking. So it means that if you have a bank account and you are transferring, today I have money and I'm transferring money to you because you and I are educated, and definitely it is almost 100% that all of us in this platform has a bank account. So if I want to transfer money to you, instead of using mobile money, I'll just enter it through my mobile banking and transfer the money to you. In that case, before the tax e-levy will affect me, I have to transfer more than 20,000 cedis per day before that tax will affect me. And this has implication on different groups. And we know some of the effects of the e-levy, which there have been studies on it. I will not talk much about because of time. Now, given the exemptions that I've mentioned and people that can be affected, you see gender differences in receipt of remittances. There are empirical evidence to show that women receive more remittances than are likely and more to receive remittances than men. So that is established. And in the use of mobile money versus banking, A lot of poor people, that is class, and many who are women do not have bank accounts, but they rather use mobile money for a lot of transactions. And this work have been shown that this group of people tend to use people in the informal sector tend to use mobile money compared to banking transaction. And these differences in threshold of exemption between internet banking and mobile money payments has gender differences, because so it portrays as an implicit form of bias against women in terms of tax system. So we see from Enyideho et al. In 2022 that there is heterogeneity of burden of e-levy among informal workers. And this way, that is a form of class, home-based informal workers. Even among the informal workers, you see that the effects are different. Home-based workers, people who are doing their work in their homes, they are more affected than those who are on the street vendors and market traders. These people, they buy, and usually the cash, they use cash transactions. And therefore, these people are less compared to home-based informal workers when it comes to the effect of e-levy. Then there's also gender differential impacts. As we see that from in terms of working in the informal and the effect of the e-levy, we see that women are less likely to be liable for e-levy, and that is what they say, because they turn up not using a lot of mobile money for transaction. And also men more likely to do Momo transaction because of their finances, and a lot of them, they are more likely to do that. Then also differential impact across social class. We see poorest income earners rely on Momo than others. So these are empirical evidence that we have in terms of the effect of e-levy. So though the tax system directly do not contain any kind of explicit bias against women, but in terms of the implementation, because they are more likely to be found in the informal sector, they are more likely to use Momo compared to men. But of course, then also poor people, those below earning low income, they are also more likely to do it. They don't have bank accounts, so they are more likely to use Momo, and therefore they are more likely to pay this tax system, where the rich will more likely, as I explained, use banking transaction, internet banking transaction. The more educated people will more likely use internet transaction to internet banking transaction, to do banking transaction, and kind of not evade, but avoid the e-levy, so they won't face this kind of burden that the poor people will have. Then what should you do? So it is important that in designing tax policies, we need to see gender through whatever we are going to do, and what people call mainstreaming it. So we have to mainstream gender issues in terms of designing a tax policy. And many of this, when we design it and able to see it through these lenses, sometimes we may not be able to do much. So in recent times, we talk about tampoo tax, and it's very difficult sometimes when you consider the laws, the ECOWAS laws and others. It's very difficult. But when you take that lens and you see how it impacts differently on different people, then you can look at what can be done. And that is why in most countries, they don't have tax system. They have tax and transfer system. So I see that women are more likely, because of this tampoo tax, and I cannot, because of efficiency reasons, when you remove that, should be broad-based. So when you start exempting many things, it affects its efficiency. So you don't want that. So what should you do? You should have a policy on transfer. You know people that when you bring a policy that you know that these people are going to be affected more than the other people. So you have a transfer system that you can transfer money to these people to cater for the kind of the inequities that have generated that kind of inequalities that we are observing, so that they can deal with it, because there's nothing that they can do about it. So all that you have to do is to have a good transfer system to mitigate the effect of the tax policy. And this is what we lack. Most developed countries have this, but this is what we lack in Ghana. And therefore, we end up everybody asking for exemption. And from economic point of view, many at times it cannot be done. So in terms of advocacy, it is important that sometimes we need to know the transfer system for policymakers to incorporate transfer system in terms of when we are acting, making gender advocacy in terms of tax system. Thank you very much. And we can do this especially with our current national identity card. Thank you very much. And I'm ready for any questions.
Thank you very much, Doc. So that was Taxation 101. And those of you who ran away from taxation, you have come to meet it here. So Auntie Patricia, should I just take, I don't know what you think, should I take the presentations and then do Q&A, or should we just jump into Q&A, before?
And the idea was to take all the presentations, but given the taxation 101 that we've just heard, I don't know if there are hands up. Maybe you can pick a few and then we continue with the other presentations. If there are no hands, I would ask that we move on and then later come to the opening discussion. So let's see if we'll see some few hands up.
Okay, so
Thank you.
any hands up? Anybody wants a quick clarification question that you want Dr. Kojo Opoku to answer? No? So if there are no hands up, it's two things. Either we all understand it very well, or we are all royally confused. But I want to take the other one, that we all understand it very well. So please just keep your notes. I'll just invite the next speaker because I can't see any hands up for now. So I will, I've been asked to put my video on, right? There we go. I would quickly go and invite Adjoa Adobia Owusu, who is an investigative journalist of the Fourth Estate, to give us some insights on gender, class, and taxation. Perhaps that would reinforce some of the theoretical issues that Dr. Kojo has, shared with us. So, Adjoa, if you are ready, we're also ready to have you. Thank you.
Yes, Shamima, I am ready, and thank you very much. I think Dr. Opoku has done most of the work, so I'll just come and add on a little, and then we can move. First of all, I will share my screen with everyone. Can you all see? Is that okay now?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So I would want us to look at two scenarios. Two people, a man and a woman, who have just completed their national service and they've been employed in the corporate sector to work. Both of them get recruited in that same organization, yet they have different salary structures. The woman is paid less than the man. We may think that this is just a scenario that I'm putting up, but this is actually the reality on the ground. This is what is happening in our society, and it's just a matter of classes, because even our traditional system, our cultural system, is simply makes women feel less in society. So at every point in time, you realize that if there are some advantages, women have less opportunities, women have less advantages than men, and this cuts across all angles, all sectors. And even in our taxation system, policies are also implemented, policies are devised also to favor men more than the women. So we look more at that. Now, what does the data say? Is there any data that proves that this is really what is happening? According to the 2021 census by the Ghana Statistical Service, when you look at averagely, you look at the employment sector, you realize that about 34.4% of women take less than their male counterparts. So everywhere in that sector, when you go averagely, you realize that a lot of women are taking 34.4% less than the female. And this has been grouped under different categories. It cuts across education, it cuts across region, it cuts across the main occupation, it cuts across working experience. But here, I am going to focus on education. Even for those who are educated, and those who have some tertiary education and above, you'd realize that they have actually the lowest, I should say. So when you're comparing the wage gap, you realize that women are paid 12.7% less than the males. With regards to those who have basic education, so if they're recruiting a man and a woman, and both of them have basic education, according to the GSS census, 60.1%, the wage gap there for men and women is 60.1%. So it means that a woman will be paid less, that is 60.1% less than a male. For those who have no education at all, if they are employed, the data says that the woman will be paid 54% less than the male counterparts. Also, when you go to the informal sector, so with regards to our employment sector, the informal sector, it says that 58.7% of females would be paid less than their male counterparts, and that's a lot more than we even anticipated. In the private formal sector, so when you go to the private sector, like where I am, you realize that a lot of the females are being paid 29.9% less than their male counterparts. In the public sector, which is the government sector, that you realize that you would expect actually a fair judgment, fair salary structure. It is also very unfair there, even though it is less than the private sector. It also has 7.5% also women gaining less salary as compared to their male counterparts. Also, according to that same census, generally, an estimated 26.5 million people are in the informal sector. So we have all these people being in the informal sector, and our previous data already shows how that gap, that percentage. Then it means that we have a lot of our women also suffering more, because we have a lot of our women in the informal sector and also in the unbanked sector. And I'm glad that when Dr. Okuku was speaking, he talked about women in the unbanked sector. Currently, our GSMA data says that we have about 32% of people in the unbanked sector, and it will surprise you that most of these people are women, because they are also the ones in the informal sector who do not have access to, it's not that they do not have access, but most times they would prefer the mobile money sector to the banking sector because of also the operational system and how it runs. Now, let's look at the females or the women in the informal sector and what really pertains to them when it comes to taxes. Apart from the normal taxes that they are likely to pay, which is the COVID-19 levy, which is the health insurance levy as a result of their purchasing of goods and services, there are some daily tolls that they are required to pay. Let's take a woman who is selling in the market, because we've already said that women are the people with the highest percentage when we talk of the informal sector. And I'll show data or some research that has been done also proving that. Now, if a woman goes to the market, apart from her buying and selling, apart from the sanitary part taxes that she has to buy and probably have to pay and all that, she goes to the market, she now has to pay for toilet fees. If you come to the corporate sector, which is the formal sector, the women there are fortunate and they have the privilege or access to some of these facilities for free, because yes, their organizations are structured in such a way that these facilities are available, but the market woman would not have access to these facilities. And so for her to be able to even use the toilet facility, she has to pay for that service. If it is even 1 cedi and she has to visit that place 3 or 5 times a day, you can imagine the cost that the person would incur. Now, looking at storage fees, when you go to the market square, you'd also realize that usually the people with the financial muscle are the men, so they are able to get access to the stores which have the closure, which is able to have some security measures. Women mostly do not. They are the ones who are usually less privileged. They do not have high resources. They do not have much resources. They also tend to spend more, especially if you have to take single women who are doing a lot of the things most of the time on their own, and they tend to spend more. Now that particular woman would also have to pay for storage fees for her goods. Comparatively, if you have a man who is also selling in that same market, he has access to a store that is secured and doesn't have to pay for all these. If a woman has to use the toilet, it means that he or she will use more, because of course we all know that women have to use because of their sanitary conditions and their sanitary situations that they would have to keep, but men do not have that same situation. In fact, unfortunately for us in our country, a man can just squat anywhere or just stand anywhere and be able to make himself comfortable. We do not have that. We have market fees, the daily tolls where these assemblies go to the women every day to take some money from them. It doesn't matter how much you've been able to earn a day. It doesn't matter how much you've been able to get. Once they are taken, and it's a structured amount, so it's a specified amount, they take it and then they go away. Unfortunately for us, the thing is, the money, whatever they are taking, whatever the taxes are being used for, usually tends to benefit women more because it's usually used for social infrastructure, health, education, and you'd expect that women would benefit more. But these monies get lost. They do not even they are not even invested in these resources. So even though the woman is paying more, she also doesn't tend to benefit more from what she's paying. She benefits less. She doesn't get the needed resources that is required. So these are some of the things. Talking of the excise tax stamp, also there is also an average amount which doesn't look at so the payee, which is the pay as you earn. It doesn't look at how much you are earning. It's just as and when it is. So it doesn't matter what you've been able to sell a day. It doesn't matter what you're able to do a day. Some people go to the market and even for an entire day, they are not able to get anything. Yet the system is structured in a sense that it doesn't even consider any of these things. Now, there is a research that Roche University did, and it talked about the industry group disaggregation in Accra's informal sector. So this particular research is strictly based in Accra. If you look at it, you realize that we have the male and the females. On the left side, which is the male, you realize that 42% of the people in the manufacturing sector are males. We have just 26.5% being in the trade sector and 31.4% of males being in the service sector. On the right side, we have 22.3, just a minute part of females being in the manufacturing sector. And for the trade, this is as high as 62.8%, and for services, 14.8%. I cited an example of women in the trade sector, women in the market sector, specifically because of this. So it means that all these things happening in the sector, all these things happening in the trade sector, women tend to suffer more than the men because it is obvious from the data that women are a lot more in the trade sector. Now, here, this particular data is also from the Roche University, and it talks about the relative tax payments in the Accra's informal sector by gender and earnings quintile. So now, you look at it on the left side, which is also the males, you realize that the male who is actually earning more, that is above the number 3, the gross earnings of the male, which is above the number 3, is now paying taxes of about 0.32. But if you look at 4, so the one who is earning less is also paying more. But if you compare the data across from 32, 17, 11, 41, and 1, and you compare it to the females, you would realize that even though the male who is earning less is paying more, it is still just up to the 41. Yet the female who is even earning less than the male is paying more taxes than the male. So that is how it is. No matter how much a woman earns, no matter how much a woman earns, she tends to pay even more taxes than the man who is actually earning more than the female. And this research does justice to that. Now, in my next slide, I talk about usually what policy analysts, government decision makers, what usually they focus on. The whole argument is that, well, informal taxes and user fees, they are not taxes. With the market fees, they are not structured in our policy, and it's not so obvious. When you talk about taxes, you just talk about the VAT, you talk about the corporate taxes, you talk about the COVID-19 levy, the market fees and all that are embedded in there. So it is not so obvious and you don't realize. And when they are counting the taxes that people pay, they usually count the structured ones, the ones that are so obvious in our books. And these ones are, because they are embedded in there, they are not counted. So they don't realize that the informal sector is actually being taxed more than the formal sector. These things, they do not become so obvious. So because of some of these excuses, because of course they are not taxes and they are not structured in a way that makes it so obvious for people to be able to realize that this is really what is happening and there is a need for us to pay attention to it. Now, if you look at our current sustainable development goals, you are supposed to get more women having equal income. So we need to be able to help reduce income inequalities. We need to be able to ensure equal opportunities and end discrimination. But if we are going to do this, what do we need to do? We've talked about all the taxes. Dr. Poku mentioned a lot, and I remember he talked about the tax and support system and all that. I wouldn't want to dwell so much on that. But then what do we need to do if we are seeing these unfair systems, if we are seeing how gendered our tax system is without much attention being paid to it because of the flimsy excuses that are given to it, then what can we do? What do we need to do? We need to be able to devise laws that can tackle these issues. But if we can use laws to tackle these issues, it means that we also need a lot more women in higher positions, in government positions, in political positions, so that when the decisions are made, they can also make decisions that affect women, because they are being affected. They will know what affects them. They will know what the right policies must be. They will know what decisions to make to be able to address these things. So I mentioned here that what should be done, gender disaggregated data. I tried searching. I don't know what Dr. Poku has and other experts can tell me, but I tried searching and I realized that even with the e-levy, I didn't get so much data on how much women are spending and how much men are spending. It's not so clear cut like that, and it's like that with a lot of our data. You don't find that distribution of how it is affecting women and how it's affecting men is generally boxed together. So even with our taxes, they are not able to tell us that, okay, so we are getting this much tax from women, we are getting this much tax from men, except for some of our private experts who are and researchers and academicians who are doing a lot more on this. So I would encourage our academicians to continue to do a lot more research on these disparities so that it becomes so obvious, and we use these things to push for advocacy. Also, it is important that we introduce threshold on taxes to protect low-income earners. Usually, it is boxed all into one, so everyone is paying this amount of tax, everyone is paying this amount of tax. When you come to our corporate sector, we are lucky enough to get that. Well, if you are earning this much, then you are paying this amount of tax, this amount of SNIT. So yes, sometimes it helps, but for the informal sector, this is not so structured. So it is important that we introduce the pay as you earn so that this becomes really structured for everyone to be able to benefit from it. I also say that it is also important that we examine tax policies through social justice lens, considering its impact on gender equality. Women benefit more from social protection programs. So once we are able to link it and we are able to know the gap there and how much we are paying, yes, you are not getting the needed resources. And I'll cite this example. If you look at even our taxes, I'll take the sanitary tax for example. Now we have 20% tax on sanitary pad. Do we actually have any product that we can say that this product is specifically for men and it is being taxed as a luxury tax? There is none. So why do we have such for women? Are we saying that sanitary tax is a commodity? It's a luxury tax. It's a luxury product that we can choose not to either use it or not. Do we have a product like that for men that we can also choose that? Okay, well, this product the men can decide to use it or not. So we are taxing it, or we are putting a luxury tax on it so that they can choose whether or not to use it. So these are just very unfair advantages or very unfair decisions that are taken to unfavor men. Unfavor women. I remember Dr. Puku talked about comparing what is happening in other countries. I stated here as a recommendation that best practices, comparative analysis, it is important that we also look at what is happening in other countries. Are they practicing the pay as you earn? What is happening with regards to their taxes that we can also implement? Is our taxes structured in such a way that we are not favoring a certain category of people? We are not favoring, or we are not paying attention to our women who also form the majority in our society? If not, then what must we do? How can we learn from these practices? What are these countries doing right that we can also implement to be able to also ensure that we're able to have fair and better tax practices and also have better social amenities for everyone to enjoy and also have equal access to it? So thank you very much. I had 10 minutes, so this is what I was able to do. But if there are any questions, I'll be glad to also share more on that.
Brilliant, brilliant presentation. Done like the journalist that you are. I think that you have really distilled the issues and further deepened our understanding of just what we are looking at when we are talking about, discriminatory tax practices. So again, if there are any immediate questions, I will take them. Otherwise, we would then proceed with the third presentation, and then we would have a group conversation where I'll try to summarize what everybody has said, and then we'll look at the way forward. How do we ensure that we think creatively around our existing tax system? I think Dr. Kojo earlier was saying that explicitly our tax laws and policies may not be discriminatory, but implicitly from the examples that he gave, obviously, there is an unfair burden on the members of the society that are already low-income earners, which has been reiterated by Adjoa in giving us a specific comparison between the formal economy and the informal economy. So Adjoa, maybe perhaps I would ask you, so how has the discourse around the fact that the formal economy is overtaxed, overburdened, in comparison with the informal economy, how has that discourse, gained ground if you're telling us that in reality, no, the informal economy is more burdened than that? Just chew on that, but I saw a hand. Karimu Mary, please unmute, and you can also put up your video so we can see you and make your contribution.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not able to put my video on now, but
okay.
I thank my good friend Dr. Kojo Poku for the presentation, and our lady journalist. Sorry, I didn't get the name.
Adjoa.
My question. Okay, yeah, thanks a lot, Adjoa, for the brilliant insight. I want to find out from the two speakers if during their search, whether it came up that representation of women in decision making, especially when it comes to the issue of taxation, has any connection to their findings, because I find it, especially Adjoa's presentation was a bit touchy on some of the things you mentioned. And if so, what can we do? I just want to find out. I mean, do we have more women in taking those decisions as far as taxation in this country is concerned? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any more hands? Any more questions? Let me open the chat box. Okay. Yes, so Adjoa and Kojo, you may answer that question.
Shamima, I'll take the first step. I'm sure Doc will also add more to that. But yes, it's a very important conversation, and I'm glad that for you, Shamima, even this year you are leading the conversation on a lot of women getting into our electoral space or our political space to be able to make their decisions. Usually when it comes to conversation around this, we realize that, well, it's our political leaders who take these decisions, but how many women do we have in parliament? Currently, the SDGs is even fighting for us to be able to get about 30% representation in parliament. Even that is not enough, but even that we have not been able to achieve. If we have less than 30% in parliament, then obviously every decision that will be taken would not favor women. And yes, it means that we have less women taking decisions on taxation, because when it comes to conversations on taxation, the policy or the decision making is made by our politicians. So yes, it's just unfortunate we have few women in parliament making that decision. This year is an election year, and I am hoping that all the women here would all come together and continue to support the women who are participating, so we can give them the necessary support, get them out there, so that whatever conversation, whatever decision that is being taken, whatever policies that are being implemented, they will tend to favor women, and we can see some differences in there. If we get them there and we don't see the differences that we want to see, then maybe we can now steer the conversation towards a different angle. But I am positive that once we see them there will be something positive coming out of it.
So my earlier question about how that discourse, the narrative about, which economy is more burdened than the other, formal and informal. And just for my own understanding, clarify for me. So are you saying that, for example, 1% of 100 cities is more burdensome than 1% of 10,000 Ghana cedis? So if I'm in the formal economy and I'm charged on a higher level of income, and someone is in the informal economy and pays stamps or levies on a lower level of income, how do you come to the conclusion that that person is more overburdened than this other person?
So, Shamima, yes. So this is where we are not paying attention to. We are saying that for you, once you take your salary, of course, the deduction has already been made, but it is on a monthly basis. The informal sector, they are paying this amount, and I use the market woman for example, so I would want to dwell on that market woman. The market woman is paying this amount on a daily basis, and it is not just even one amount. It's not just one fee. So I cited examples of the market user fees, the storage fees, the toilet fees, and probably some other tools that I do not even know about. But these assembly people go to them and take these amounts of money from them on a daily basis. If you should calculate the amount of money that that woman who is earning less is paying on a daily basis, and you multiply it by the 30 days in a month, you'd realize that yes, they're actually paying more, because for them, unfortunately, they are also earning less. So if you compare their earnings and their daily tolls, comparing it to those in the formal sector and their monthly, yes, I would say monthly, and their monthly taxes, you'd realize that those in the informal sector, they are paying more than those in the formal sector. Usually that has been the conversation, and I think that it is high time we paid attention to the little tools that we are not taking advantage of. And I said that that we are not paying attention to. And I said that usually when it comes to policy making and structuring and decision making, we look at, yes, COVID-19 maybe, we will look at, yes, the SNIT, we will look at yes, the VAT, we will look at, the major things that are contained in the documents. But we don't look at the petty things, like the woman who would have to go to the markets and every day would have to pay toilet fees and visit that place. These are things that we usually do not pay attention of and we neglect. But if you are in the formal sector, you obviously have opportunities to most of these amenities wherever you work. So it becomes very easy. I don't know. I've seen Dr. Mr. Nyako and Dr.
I saw him
Opoku trying
too.
to get in. So I'm sure they will help answer most of these.
Yes, I'm going to bring them in now. So I think that Kojo, Dr. Opoku, if you just be on standby, let me take Nana Kwesi Owusu and Dorothy. Dorothy, I think I saw you first. So Dorothy, what's your question or contribution? Nana Kwesi, you too, and then we'll come to Kojo to also take a dig into the issue of the formal informal economy comparison. Yes, Dorothy.
All right.
Dorothy, your
when
not stable.
she was again. Okay now.
Try again. Let's see.
Aja was suggesting that the what to do, we should maybe use the pay as you earn system and in the informal sector. And I want to find out, will that be sustainable? Because are you going to put down some measures to know exactly how much they earn? Or what? How are you going to do that in the informal sector using the pay as you earn system? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. Nana Kwesi.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning to you all for the insight that you've given us this morning. I want to find out, in all the presentation, I was like, why we are all in the same environment, a man, a woman in the market, one earning less, yet paying more taxes. I ask myself, why? Is there some contributing factor to it? I ask myself, why in the formal sector, a man and a woman go work in the same company, one is earning less, the woman is earning less. Is there a contributing factor to it? And in the analysis and coming back to, the data, I didn't really get it, because we don't have the data as to how much women are paying in terms of taxes in the informal sector. How did we come to the conclusion that they are paying more? Thank you very much.
Very well. Thank you, Nana Kwesi. Sorry, when you do come to speak up again, just tell us the organization you're representing. So, Dr. Kojo, I'll come to you now to perhaps maybe throw some academic lights on the issues that have come up.
Okay. Thank you very much, Amima. So you, on your question on the somebody paying the same 1%, so technically that's what it refers to as progressivity. That is fairness in tax system. You see, tax, one of the properties that it has to be fair. You pay according to your strength. So you have somebody earning 100 cedis. That is very difficult for the person to use it to take care of himself. So you say the person should pay 1%. And the other person earning 100,000 a month, which he could even save some. And you say the person should pay 1%. So on a cedi terms, the person is paying more than the person, but it's not fair. It's not a fair tax system. So we want to ensure that as your income increases, you pay more, a higher percentage on your income. And so World Bank actually suggests that I think $3.5 a day is what should be, even for formal sector workers, it should be zero taxed. That is, you shouldn't tax. In Ghana right now, that would be amount to about 1,500 a month if we were to do that. So that if anybody earn income of below 1,005 cedis, the tax rate should be zero. We shouldn't tax the person at all. So that one will favor the poor people. So once you just consider just 1% to tax everybody, though the person is rich paying more, the effect on him or her is not the same as the effect on the poor person that you are taxing there. So that is fairness. When a tax system is like that, it's not fair. And that is what pertains in most of our, in a lot of, especially the informal sector. In the formal sector, it's a graduated tax, so you don't get these issues. But the informal sector, we find this very issue there. Then,
do you therefore agree, yes, with Ajua that on a simple comparative basis, the informal sector in Ghana is more overburdened than the formal sector? Do you come to the same conclusion?
not necessarily so, but the issue is that even though they are not burdened like the formal sector, the incidence, it is the poor people even within the sector who suffers most. So if you compare the formal to the informal, because of course, many of the informal, you don't even see them. And that is why the government usually use presumptive tax. So they will not even do proportion. They will just come to the market and say, everybody, you are paying 100 cedis. And you have a man and a woman. The man has a big store because he has capital. So you have a big store selling with all those things there. And he's getting high income. But the woman have a tabletop because there's no capital. And they are saying that pay the same amount, sometimes the same amount, not even percentage. And so even though the informal sector is paying less compared to the formal sector, within the informal sector, those who suffer most are the poor people, who are usually women. I think that is the problem that Ajua wanted to bring it out.
Right. Dr. Esther Abuaji's hand is up. Doc, please come on and take the mic. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much, Amima, for the opportunity. I just want to congratulate the two speakers for giving us the information to chew on. Dr. Poku, I'll be grateful if we have the opportunity to explore further how the tax and transfer system could potentially have more equitable gender impacts. I didn't get, I need further clarification, education around that. In relation to the ongoing discussion about the comparison between the formal and informal economy, what is happening there, I want to be a little careful about this comparison. I'm saying this because if we are comparing the fact that market women have to pay for toilet storage fees and market tolls. For me, it's a bit about comparing oranges and bananas, in the sense that the storage fees become part of the cost of doing business. I'll be more comfortable comparing the status of men in the informal economy and women in the informal economy to do this comparison. Perhaps we can argue that maybe women in the market have to pay more for toilets than women in the formal sector. Yeah, but the storage fees become part of the cost of doing business for women in the informal economy. Again, I would also love to have a comparison between how much, you see, women in the formal sector are also subject to formal taxes because their income taxes are deducted at source. So I would prefer a more rigorous comparison, and that will make our argument. There is something else that we need to look at. I do agree that market tolls are collected, and we don't see the linkage between the market tolls and improvement to the lives of women who operate in and utilize the market. But we have talked about this thing anecdotally for a very long time. If somebody who says, okay, give me rigorous data about how, what amounts assemblies collect from markets and what they use this money for, and then we can prove with data that they actually do not spend proportionately as much on improving markets, which could have potentially beneficial effects of women economic operators, we'll be talking anecdotally for a very long time. Shamima, the last thing I want to talk about is about the argument that if we have more women in influential positions or decision-making positions and policy positions, things could get better. That one is also a little bit of a debate. For somebody who's been watching this space for about 3 decades, I think that we need more than having women in these positions. I mean, it's good for visibility. But some of the highest positions in economic management, in finance, have been occupied by women. By women who have also, some of whom have been involved in previous efforts at promoting gender budgeting and so on and so forth. So that their presence there may not guarantee the desired results. As the women currently in Parliament, it will be interesting to look at the various Hansards to see the kinds of contributions they make to economic policy debates and their capacity to analyze, unpack, and do advocacy on the issues. The point I'm making is this. In addition to getting more women in positions of authority, getting more women as ministers, as chief directors, and what have you, there has to be stronger advocacy from our end, backed with better and more credible evidence to show that this is what the figures indicate. This is the incontrovertible truth or evidence that it is impacting negatively on our women and therefore impacting
Just when it was getting sweeter. Doctor,
Yeah.
I think that, hello.
Well, I think we've lost her.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm going
There
to,
is-
I think
there-
that he said the
Shamima,
state.
yeah,
Yes.
Shamima, there is a question in the chat box from Lamna to asking, does it mean we should not widen the tax net to cover more informal sector, especially realizing that there is a burden on the less formal workers?
And I think that Dr. Esther Ofe-Abuajin has given us some food for thought in terms of how we want to even approach that comparison between formal and informal sector. So let's go and hear from the labor experts. So we understand the nature of labor within the formal economy, the nature of labor within the informal economy, and how these issues that we're raising regarding tax justice should apply as a matter of proper cause. Dr. Kobina Nyaku Otu, Director, Labor Research and Policy Institute of TUC, if you're on, would like to hear your perspectives on labor from with regards to gender, class, and taxation, please.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, please, loud and clear.
I'm in far away, Gomwafete.
Good for you.
Okay, so a lot of interesting conversation. Ideas have already come up. I feel even disadvantaged having listened to these eloquent presentations by Ajua and Dr. Poku, but also the contributions that have been made so far. So I'm not a gender expert, even though I know a lot about gender pay gap. And I'm not a tax expert, but we have some ideas. When it comes to class, because trade unions, we have read Das Capital by Karl Marx, we know a lot about class. But the question of whether the informal economy or the formal economy is overburdened or not, you can look at it this way. And as a disclaimer, let me also say that I wrote my PhD thesis on the informal economy. You can look at it this way. This is a country that relies heavily on indirect taxation, not direct. And we know that indirect taxation is a regressive form of taxation. And if you say a tax is regressive, it means that it overburdens the poor more than it does for the rich. And if you also say that in Ghana, the poor are mostly in the informal economy, then Ajua's presentation illustrates that point, that the informal economy is overburdened. They pay a significantly higher proportion of their incomes on taxes, in paying taxes, compared to the rich. And the rich are mostly they are mostly in the formal economy. But let me also bring in other perspective. We are talking about taxes. Unfortunately, this country needs more taxes, because if you look at the data, we have run budget deficit since independence, consistently every year in the last 67 years, we have run budget deficit. And the simple reason is that our revenues are often less than our expenditure. So what we do, and part of the reason why our revenues are not enough, is that so many people work informally and they are not directly taxed. Of course, there are also formal economy people that are also not directly taxed. So you can talk about the lawyers, mostly men, consultants, mostly men, and they earn good incomes, but they are not taxed. They are not taxed directly. But we also know that part of the reason why we don't have enough revenues is the thing we know already: corruption and inefficiencies in the tax administration. Now, these inefficiencies and corruption actually reduce the revenues we can mobilize. But they also pad our national expenditures. They increase it unnecessarily. So whilst we are not getting enough revenue, our expenditures are also padded because of inefficiencies and corruption. In the last 67 years, what we have done is to borrow our way through the years. So we borrow to spend because the revenues are not sufficient. And that is why every 3 to 4 years, our debts become unsustainable. We can no longer borrow from the usual market. And the country can only seek a bailout from the World Central Bank. And that is the International Monetary Fund. This explains why we have been to the IMF 17 times in the last 67 years. How do you solve this revenue challenge? Yes, we will need to raise more revenues. To do that is through taxation, but we also need to cut wasteful expenditures. How do we get more revenues? There are two options for us: to tax more or make the most out of the existing tax handles. I will prefer a combination of the two, taxing more, and I will explain, and also making the most out of the existing tax handles we have. But my emphasis will be on the latter, making the most out of the existing tax handles. Now, if you look at our tax structure, we appear to have given up our legitimate right to tax from our most abundant resources. So how much tax are we getting from mining? If you look at our GDP, the bulk of the growth, revenue, export revenues are coming from mining, but we are not taxing that sector as we should. We have also considerably reduced custom duties on imported goods. Of course, sometimes people complain that the tariff, the custom duties at the ports are so high. If you go into it, much of it is corruption. It's not because the taxes themselves have gone up. Of course, I will also admit that there are instances when you have imposed other taxes on imported materials, like COVID-19 tax and those kinds of taxes. But much of what we see in custom duties is often corruption. People just pardon, the money is not going to government. Now, in the natural resource sector, we know that some of the largest companies there have all kinds of tax breaks, tax incentives that have nothing to do with the extraction of natural resources. So you have a company like AngloGold Ashanti, the import of machinery and everything is tax exempt. Meanwhile, if you're a Ghanaian and you're trying to do some construction, when you import, you have to pay custom duties on it. Okay. So most of the largest companies in the natural resource sector have continued to enjoy massive tax incentives. And these tend to deprive the state of resources for national development. Now, in the absence of, when we are unable to tax the natural resource sector, we are compared to tax consumption. And so we have VAT, the value added tax. But we know that incomes are low in Ghana. And many people do not consume via the market. So how do you tax them? And that is the more reason why revenues are also not coming. Now, if you are relying on VAT, it's an indirect tax. It's a regressive tax. You are punishing the poor more, those in the informal economy, than you are punishing than the formal sector workers. Now, so we now have this situation is compounded by what I've referred to earlier, indiscriminate granting of tax exemptions. So, for example, the IMF document, which gave us this the latest IMF bailout, says that VAT and customs exemptions are estimated at about 4% of gross domestic product. 4%. So 4% of our GDP is lost to tax exemptions. Remember that we spend just about the same amount on free SHS. So when people say free SHS is expensive, we are giving the same things to rich companies, rich individuals, in the name of tax exemptions. Now, there's then urgent need for us to plug the loopholes in the tax system before we can think about imposing additional taxes on Ghanaians. If you cannot plug the loopholes, please don't talk about additional taxes. But there are two areas where we can look at. The natural resource sector. This is a sector that needs to be taxed and taxed well. But also the questions about property taxes. Why is it that for 67 years, this country has no way of taxing property? Part of the problem is it's a class question. Those that own property are also the people in charge. And you cannot expect them to impose a tax on their wealth. And those people are mostly male, they are not women. So there's also a gender question there. That is why every year we talk about property taxation, but it never happens. But we also see the class system in the way we distribute resources, the limited tax revenues we have. So if, for example, you take those of us in Accra, we have all times complained bitterly about poor roads. But we fail to recognize that if you go to Sefia Kontombra, where they produce large amount of cocoa, they don't even have roads, let alone have a poor one. Okay. Now, even within Accra, the distribution of road network will also reveal some class compromise or some class warfare going on. So if you take, for example, some 4 years ago, we did an underground network, road network, that connect East Legon to Spintex and Airport Hills. That did not completely solve the traffic congestion there. Now we are doing an overpass above the underground, and that overpass will connect the 3 affluent communities of East Legon, Spintex, and the Airport Hills. Meanwhile, the Kaneshi or Doko Malam Kaswa traffic persists and is getting worse. So this is the class warfare that is ongoing. It's so silent, subtle. Nobody talks about it. What happens to all those whose cocoa we have taxed historically so large? What happens to them? Their road network, their housing network. What happens to all those people? Nobody talks about it. And those of us in Accra are actually all the time complaining. Now, let me say a few things about the property thing, the property taxation. This is one of the largest source of income for many European and American society, economies. But we are unable to tax property in this country, in spite of all the talk we have done. In fact, the budget that introduced e-levy also said that in that budget year, we were going to have a property tax address system. It hasn't happened. And the principal reason is that the owners of property in this country are those in charge. They are the politicians. They are also male. They are not women. So we shift the burden rather to the poor, informal economy people. And for me, frankly, whenever I hear that expand the tax net to cover the informal economy, I get a bit angry. What is there in the informal economy to tax? Poor people and in very, very low income, surviving on the margins. And you still think that you want to tax them, whilst the rich individuals and companies are being left off the hook. I want to make a last point about the gender pay gap. It's not actually the case that we have different salary scale for men and women. They could subsist on the same salary. So actually, the salary could be the same, but their incomes or earnings will not be the same. Part of the reason, and in fact, the most important reason, is that men occupy the higher positions where the salaries are high, and women normally occupy supporting lower positions where the salaries and conditions of service are often too low. And this has persisted over the years, historically. So we now
Shamima,
have
I
this
think we have
huge
lost
gender
Mr.
pay.
Ochu. I cannot hear.
Wow.
I
Hello?
can actually hear him. Who else can hear?
Please,
can
who
hear
else?
you.
Yeah, if you
Okay.
can't hear, it might be
So just
your
log off and
internet.
log
Yeah.
on. Yes, go off and come back on again.
Oh, okay. Then it must be from my end.
Yes, please.
Doc,
Kwabena,
sorry for the interruption.
Thank you. I've ended my presentation.
you ended your presentation.
Yes.
Looking like a real true TUC, trades union, and member. Sorry, let me just start my video. Thank you very much. And just like that, Kobina has taken us from the shallow end right and thrown us really into the deep end. He's raising so many other issues that I think that we should have the conversation about. It seems like we require some major tax reforms from what you're telling me, and that we really are not scratching the surface of the problem by seemingly not have developing policies that will really target the areas of our economy that really have the money. The mining companies will tell you that they are overtaxed. So how do we deal with that? That pushback from them that they are overtaxed, that they're the highest taxpayers. If you look at the profile of the large taxpayers, that mining companies are always on the top. So how do we resolve that? You've also raised issues of focusing more on natural resource taxation rather than consumption taxation, because really, what is it? And VAT seems to have received a lot of criticism over the years as being regressive, and yet it seems to be the lowest hanging fruit that successive governments use to raise revenue. So how do we situate everything that has been said today with the agenda, net rights, as well as tax Justice Network seeks to promote. Conceptual clarifications and streamlining the advocacy and clarity regarding what we want to see in a fair, representative, equitable tax administration system. The floor is now open for comments and contributions. Please raise your hand and I'll be able to call you. You can also put your questions in the chat box and I'll be happy to read them with the help of Madam Patricia. Yes, please.
Yeah, so Shamima, whilst you are waiting for hands to be raised, I would like to urge all of us to complete the registration link put in the chat box. We are 56 on this webinar, 56 made up of participants and the speakers, but we have only 18 that have completed. So please, we urge all of you to complete the form. Thank you.
Whilst I wait for the questions to come up, maybe I'll start with my own questions. If you have joined us, this is a live seminar organized by Net Rights in partnership with Tax Justice Network. We are having a conversation around the issue gender. We're trying to look at Ghana's tax system and see if it's gender equitable and fair, and who holds the disproportionate burden of taxation. And amongst others, we have had speakers from the Legon, Doc institution.
Center for Social Studies. Doc, I hope I'm right. Social Policy Studies.
Center for Social Policy Studies.
Shamima, we've lost you. So I can't see any hands. We were having a very lively conversation.
There's a hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, Gideon. Gideon.
Okay.
Hi. Okay. Good morning again. I just wanted to find out that how can we pressure the government to actually implement property tax, since we realize that most of the tax evasions actually is happening along class lines, and usually it affects gender because most women fall below the upper class. So how do we get property tax, get the government and then its machineries to actually implement right property taxes, which can actually help reduce the burden in the informal sector, which predominantly affects women? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me find the question. Can you, okay, so Lamnatu, I think send this one again. If we have to focus on taxation more, if we have to focus taxation more on natural resources, what happens especially as most districts get their internal revenue generation from markets? Should we completely ignore the informal sector workers? I think, Doug, this is coming to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll leave the pressure on the government to implement the property tax to Dr. Otu. I think this should be the work of TUC, the workers over there. They should give more pressure to the government because the law is there. So all what they need to do is to implement it and implement it well. And they need some pressure from somewhere. And I think Otu and his people can do this work. Now, when it's come to do we ignore the informal sector? I don't think so. And it shouldn't be, because informal sector makes the tax system inefficient. Because once you want to tax people, they run away to the informal sector, and that's not good. You want everybody to be affected, depending on your strength. In when we are talking about a fair tax system, but because there's a place, immediately you push them, they run away, and you don't see them, you can't view them. There's no, you can't monitor any of their things that they are doing, the activities that they are doing, and so. But we should have a strategy. You should have a strategy to bring them in to the formal sector where we can easily see them. And so one of my arguments against e-levy is the fact that it pushed people were making attempts, because one of the issues is cashless. When there's cashless society, it is easy to formalize it. And mobile money was bringing us to that level. But the e-levy somehow was able to push people, a lot of people, back to the cash society, which limits our ability to be cashless, so that we can bring them in. So any targets, instead of maybe antagonizing the presumptive taxes. And when you say, I explain the presumptive tax, where you go there, you say everybody is paying 100 cedis, irrespective of your income. No, that is not good. But you go there, get information about the people operating in that system, and tax them according to their income. And that is what we think it should be done. And that way, you are bringing them to informal. If you say that it's a burden on them, so you are no longer going to tax them, then you are going to have few people in the formal sector. And realizing the burden, they will also run to the informal sector. So you end up doing what the Dr. Otu talked about. We'll be always be borrowing to finance our expenditure and other things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So was that Kobina Kojo? Are you
Hello.
the one? Yes.
No. Hello.
Kobina, yes, please.
Mama, okay, so I can come in briefly here.
Please.
So there are pockets of very rich people in the informal economy. There are few, and nobody is suggesting that we should not go after them. We should tax them. They are mostly also men. So even if you compare a strict comparison of men and women in the informal economy, you find that men tend to be even employers in the informal economy. They tend to have more assets in the informal economy compared to women. Now, so if you go to Okaishi, if you go to Aboso Okai and all those places, there are men earning good money, much more than some people in fact, much more than some people in the formal economy. We should tax them. We should go after them and make sure that they pay their fair share of taxation. My point is that for the informal economy generally, the average informal economy person who is a woman is not earning enough for the society to prioritize taxing them and going after them, when in fact the growing sectors that are actually earning hard currency, dollars, revenues, we are actually treating them with kid gloves in terms of taxation. So that is the point I'm making. I'm not saying that we should ignore the informal economy. We should do that, but we should do so in a manner that we do not overburden them, because these are people essentially struggling to survive in the informal space, because the state doesn't do much for them. Now, is the mining sector overtaxed? What is the criteria for saying that the mining sector is overtaxed? They say they are the large taxpayers only because they are comparing themselves with other sectors that are not earning much. But let's compare the amount of tax they pay compared to the revenues they generate. So if you check, say, the Ministry of Finance website, in 2018, gold mining brought in about $5.7 billion in terms of export revenue. Royalty plus taxation on that sector yielded about 400. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. yielded about $470 million for Ghana government. If you do the mathematics, it means that royalties and taxes from the gold sector was less than 10% of the total export revenue from gold. This is way too poor. The average informal economy pays more than 20% of his or her income in taxes. But the gold mining sector as a whole is paying less than 10% tax revenue and also royalty. So there's something to be said there. And then besides that, we are not even sure how much the amount of export they declare. We are not even sure. We are not doing much work in those areas. If you take, and we should also change the contract model in the natural resource sector. The Saudi Arabians hire oil companies to drill oil for them. For every barrel of oil you bring, they give you some $12, and then they go and market that oil and sell it over $80 per barrel. We have given our oil to the oil companies. They drill it, and when they have sold it, they give us 18% of whatever they realized. This kind of natural resource extraction contractual arrangement must change. We must learn from the Saudis. We must learn from the Norwegians. How have they done it? Said that they have generated so much revenue from their natural resources. They own it. They get somebody to do it for them. They pay the person off. We own it. We give it to somebody. They drill it. They get something and they give us something. The model is not helping us, and we need to go back. If you look at some of the gold contracts we have today, they are so similar to the very first gold concession we granted in this country in 1897. Not much has changed. And I think if you want to avoid this repeated trip to the IMF, we need to do something about the natural resource sector and generate more revenues for ourselves. Thank you.
Let me take a few more comments. Let me take some comments from the chat box. Then I'll come to you, Faustina and Kizito. Zulkaninu Abdullahi says, what can the authorities do to prevent people from running to the informal sector to avoid taxes? And Dr. Estofe Abuaji has a little clarification to make. She says, apologies for a little clarification on my comments earlier. I was not suggesting that the informal economy is less burdened by the taxation arrangements in place. I was indicating that we should get the basis for comparison clear. We must compare the sector on the one hand, as well as compare gender-related performance within the informal sector. And Faustina says people were transferring hundreds of thousands of cedis through Momo and paying pittance as tax. What about that? And Dr. Ofe adds again, I had wanted Dr. Opoku to provide me with some further education on the tax and transfer system and achieving gender equitable impact. So, Doctor, please take note of that. When we come back to you, you can respond to that. Faustina says, rich market women don't pay much tax, considering the big shops they have. What can be done to reach them?
Yes.
Yes. I'm coming. Dr. Kobina, please hold on. Jifa says, if we fix the financial flows, we can get a lot of tax for development. That's one issue that has not yet featured in our conversation, the bit about the illicit financial flows. Okay, Alberta also says, let's tax the companies after their tax relief. They change their names when it's time to pay tax. Government should let them pay something before they change their name. So, Kizito. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And then I would like to say that, I've enjoyed all the presentations. The presentations have really been insightful. But then most of the questions I wanted to ask, Dr. Opoku They seem to have answered a lot of them, so I'll be brief. But then there seems to be a narrative that market women don't have money. And for somebody who has stayed in Kumasi for a while and having lived, for example, very close to people who trade in the KJT market and then the central markets, I tend to have an opposite view of this. However, to sort of make the argument a little bit more academic, for us to be able to proceed on this direction, I would suggest that a research be undertaken to really understand or identify the income levels of these market operators. Because of course, there are petty traders, that is understood. And by the word petty trader or petty trading, one can assume that the income won't be enough as compared to somebody who may be trading on a larger scale. That is fairly understood. But then to create that, perception that market women, traders, so to say, do not have money or don't earn enough, and for that, I'm not suggesting that traders or market women have to be taxed more than those in the formal sector. That is not my argument. But I would want the conversation to be more situated, on the basis of science and research. It helps then for us to be able to deepen the advocacy that the likes of net right and tax justice have been promoting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Faustina, would you want to still make your points, or did I capture them in your comments book?
I think you captured them in my comments, but I just wanted to add a little that, you see, during the before the e-levy, you can transfer 10,000 cedis or 20,000 cedis, and you paid only 10 cedis tax for that. And so people kept their monies in their Momo wallets instead of at the banks or in such, because they paid very little tax on it. And so I thought that the e-levy was going to eliminate those people who are paying unfair taxes on over huge sums of money. But now I must say that they've reduced the e-levy drastically because it didn't work. If I know you send 1,000 cedis and they take about 40 cedis, but now they've stopped doing that. But it's too late, because people left the e-levy system completely and it fell through. So I think that this e-levy thing should be revisited and probably, you see, Ghanaians, if you go to other countries, even in Africa, I don't like us comparing Ghana to the US and the UK and European countries. And here, let's compare ourselves to other countries in Africa. Even when you go to other countries, if the government brings a tax, of course, civil society has the right to fight against taxes that are unfair, particularly those that affect women. This morning, I sent someone to buy some items in the market for me. She came back with 100 cedis of tomatoes, which is just about some 20 pieces or something, very small pieces. And you see, our market women too, they are aware of the dollar, the rise and fall of the dollar, and they are aware and they know when petrol is increased and all that, and they do their own economics and the calculations. You understand? But I must say that our rich women pay very little tax. I know when I was in Sunyani that a very rich woman, she sold clothes, shoes, and those days in the 80s. And she colluded with these GRA staff, and she paid very little. Even at that time, I worked with the Ghana News. I was very, very angry about it. But I'm not saying it's only the women. Like a doctor or someone said about Abuso Kai, and
There are so many people in the informal sector who don't even pay. What about the Lebanese? The foreigners on the Spintex Road with huge, are we monitoring them? How much tax do they pay to the government? These people have big shocks and all that. So the government is not doing enough to spread the tax net or even monitor taxes. Our problem in this country is enforcement of law, enforcement and implementation of the law and all that. And until we change this habit, we'll continue to have taxes, and it's women and children who will be affected most. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I think that we want to be done by 12. So I'm going to start with you, Ajwa. I know you have to quickly leave us because you have a meeting. In your wrapping up comments, if you can just again highlight if you can address any of the issues that have come up, but highlight for us some specific call to action. I know you gave us some recommendations, but from everything that you have heard, what do you think we might need to do if we're truly to center the conversation around, a more consciousness about the gendered perspectives in the making of our tax policies?
Okay, Shamima, thank you very much. And thank you so much for all the inputs that are coming in, especially to Dr. Ofeya Boaje. I would also want to make a few clarifications before I continue. So initially when I started, I think someone asked a question about how we are getting data or what is informing the data on how women are earning less than the men. This data was from the Ghana Statistical Service. So the last census that was conducted in 2021, they gave that data that averagely 34.4% of women were earning lower than the men. So that's where the data is coming from. Now, a lot of arguments have been raised about people in the informal sector having more money and all that, which is really true. I don't doubt it. But I think when I was talking, I was focusing more on those who were earning less, even in the informal sector, those who were earning less. So it is good that I make that clarification too. But at the end of it all, when Faustina was talking, she mentioned something about what about people like the Lebanese, like the foreign people who are coming into our country. That is why we have tax exemptions for the multinational companies. And these are conversations that we also need to have. When it comes to tax exemptions for multinational companies that are setting up in Ghana, what is the conversation around that? Is there a way that we can review the tax exemptions that we give to these multinational companies, because they tend to have an upper hand over the domestic companies? Even if yes, then it means that there is something that we really need to do about that. But I'll focus on two main things. I talked about getting a lot more women in parliament, but it wasn't the only thing that I think I mentioned in my recommendations. We can't have like a one-stop solution to it all. We need to have like every hands on board, and two main things must be done. One is data collection, and almost every one of us who spoke about data collection. If we have proper data collection system, it will be very easy for us to be able to analyze and have, okay, so we have these people in the informal sector, these people getting this amount of money, and that is where the pay as you earn come in. So these people are earning so much, whether they are in the formal sector or they are in the informal sector, we know that this is how much this person is getting on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, or on a monthly basis. So if you are getting this amount of taxes from this person, then it is fair enough. But if we don't do that, there is no way that we'll be able to continue to have these conversations. It will continue to be recommendations without really any basis or anything to have a firm ground to stand on. The second thing is corruption, and I'm glad I've seen Ishmael Zulu here when they talk about illicit financial flows. Corruption. Recently, the fourth estate story on the SML and how one company was getting so much money from even the revenue that is being made. So one company is able to help the Ghana Revenue Authority to be able to get more revenue, yet most of the revenue that is also being collected is also going back to them for no work done. These are some of the things that we need to look at. If corruption occurs, what even happens to these people? Are there any sanctions involved? I will still focus on the SML report. The president releases a report and he said that, well, these are my recommendations. So you may decide to do this or that. You may decide to cease this particular contract or not. If there are no sanctions involved, the Procurement Authority acknowledges that, well, there were on 3 occasions, the GRA came to us and they even requested that we give them an opportunity to give SML single source procurement, and we declined to do that. But then, at a point in time, they ratified the processes. Procurement experts claim, because I am not a procurement experts say that with ratifications, there are sanctions involved. Why was nobody sanctioned? These are things that until we all come together and we decide to address these concerns regarding corruption, we will not be able to have like an ultimate solution to these. So for me, I would finalize on these 2 things: data collection system being proper, for us to be able to gather enough data on some of these things to be able to have conversations and be able to advocate for proper tax systems or progressive tax systems. These actions would continue. And if we also don't curb corruption, it means that even every money that we get, it will go back into other loopholes that we will never be able to trace and not get the developments that we need the taxes for. So thank you very much, Samima. And this was a very useful conversation. I am sure I will go back to the YouTube to also watch every other conversation that will come up after this. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. Please give a round of applause wherever you are, Joa. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so very much. So, Doc, I'm coming to you now for your, answer to some of the questions that has come up, especially the concern or the clarification that Dr. Esofa Abuaje asked of you, whilst you also now conclude with your own call to action. So that's Dr. Kojo Opoku, you first, and then I would come to Dr. Kwabena Nyakun O2.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks, Ajua. So, Dr. Fabuaji wanted to ask about the issue about the transfer system.
Yes.
And so, many a times when we do advocacy, for example, I use Tampu tax as an example, the sanitary pad issue as an example. Usually what we refuse to recognize is that it's difficult from economic point of view to just take away the tax VAT on sanitary pad, because apart from taking it out, it has a lot of implication on other sectors, especially the input raw material that are used to. All of them has effect, and we are going to consider them differently. And so usually policymakers will avoid that. So what I'm saying is that when you analyze a tax and you see that it has a differential implication on group of people and we want to solve that, one of the best way to do it is to do a tax and transfer system, and that you recognize this is the problem. And so every month, especially with respect to women, this is something that it is every month it has to be there. So in your analysis, in your policy design, you are having this that to affect a kind of the impact is severe on a group of people. So you can have a tax and transfer system where you say, an amount on average, how a woman will use every month. And even if, for example, this policy, when they were doing advocacy, what I was saying, even if the government, you think that you may not have the resources, especially given your revenue situation, to cater for every woman, I'm sure there are a lot of women who don't care paying 1,000 cedis and a tax on it for sanitary pad, but a lot like schoolgirls and other things, you can transfer. And now that we have ID system for everybody, you can take that JSS and the SS people in your tax and transfer system, give maybe is it 20 cedis or so, and something that will be able to take care of them for that month. Then is consistent. So in every aspect, when you recognize there are those kind of inequities, inequalities in your tax system, you provide a tax system. Sometimes you cannot do anything about it by taking it out, because when you take it out, it has different implications. So we introduce all those into it when it is a class system. And that's why in some countries, immediately you file your tax, they recognize your income, they transfer amount of money to you, because you are below the threshold so we don't tax you, we actually give you more. And that is a tax and transfer system. Sometimes they look at your children, the number of children that you have, and so they consider all those things. But unfortunately, we don't have those situations in Ghana. So in advocacy and policy design that we present to policymakers, we should include all these things. And then there was also a question about the fact that the informal sector, some are earning high and some are not. And actually it is true. So if you look at the informal sector, there are studies that have shown that there are tiers, different tiers in the informal sector. And that's why Doc actually mentioned about the lawyers, the accountants that move from one place to another. There are a lot of them professionals in it. When you go to the market, also they are like that. But when you are designing tax, it's not easy as that because, for example, in our tax system, you don't tax agricultural workers or farmers. We don't tax them. And the reason is not because they don't earn income. There are a lot of farmers who are earning big income. We know them. Some of them talk. Some of the MPs have gone into it. But it's just difficult because in tax design, you want to make sure that what the amount that you spend in going to tax somebody a given amount should not be more than the amount that you take from that person. And so going to agriculture sectors one by one, agriculture farmers, one by one in their farm to know them, it's too expensive. And so sometimes they recognize the difficulty and therefore they accept those things. And so it is because of our informal sector, it is difficult to get in touch with some group of people to be able to tax them well, to know their income and tax them well. Now, typical is lawyers that we know they earn. They take a lot of money from individuals who bring their cases before they go to court, but all those things, they take cash. So what we were saying is that usually you use a better means, a very simple means that you can get them. And that's why I was talking about promotion of cashless payment, that you can monitor them. This lawyer, this is how much he's receiving every month. So they transfer amount to him. You have the record at the end of the year. You send it back to them that we realize that this is what you have received for all these years. Account for it and pay tax on it. And that's how we need to go. And at the end, I'm saying that if you are thinking about tax, we have to look at every tax system. We have to look at it from gender lens point of view. If you don't look at it that way, you will not even see anything. In fact, you may send people to parliament and other things, but if they don't have a gender lens, they will not be able to see the implications of the tax law, how it will affect men and women differently. So every policy that we pass, we should be able to, the advocacy group, the people should be able to have researchers and policy analysts that will be able to look at the policy from, or the law from gender lens point of view. And when you see that, you'll be able to initiate policies that can mitigate against those issues. Thank you.
Can you use 1 second to speak about the issue of illicit financial flows and how that also affects the unfair burden on taxpayers?
So as Doc talked about, so the money, a lot of monies come into the country and others also leaves our shore by not through the formal system. In fact, if you look at the mining system that Doc talked about, a lot of them, the small scale businesses, a lot of them leave the system without the formal system. So all those money that leaves, the people that earn those money, you don't know them, so you can't tax them. So it means that they are not taxpayers in regards to those funds. And so once you are not able to recognize them, for them to account for the amount of money that they are getting, and you also need look at the impact of our electoral system. It's said that every government is forced to make a lot of infrastructure to solve a lot of social issues, social spending, health, education, and other things. And so while they are forced, the only way out is to borrow. If the borrowing is not available, then they end up taxing more. Taxing more, and where they could not have even taxed, now they will come to tax. And that's where, when they are doing that, they don't even want to consider who will be affected or not. So because they need money at that point of view. So then it will affect the class, even if the poor people are going to suffer, like e-levy, because they needed to get the money to solve some problem. They have to do it without looking at all those, and it has a lot of gendered implications and other social differences on other social classes.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Kojo Opoku. So finally, Dr. Kwabena, Dr. Kwabena Otu, to also give us his closing remarks and his specific call to action. Dr. Nyaku.
Thank you, Shemima. Of interesting ideas, discussions already. I think the bottom line is that this country needs more revenues. How we get those revenues is a matter of ongoing discussion. There are many areas. We already have many tax handles. It is important that we make those tax handles work and work better before we even think of rolling new taxes. Property taxes, somebody said that this is something the TUC must apply pressure. We will do that. But I think pressure for politicians to do the right things in this country must come from all manner of quarters, all of us.
Yeah.
And we should not, we appear to be a country where we touch and go. So one issue comes up, we discuss it for 1 week, and then it goes off, and then something else comes. It is important that we sustain the pressure. We have people dedicated, and that is why projects like this are important. People dedicated to making sure that the recommendations we offer are appropriate, and they are the politicians are going to take them. My last point about the transfer system, and it links also with the illicit financial flows. I made this point some time ago, and the Bank of Ghana descended heavily on me. You see, the Bank of Ghana head office, down there is what we call the cow lane. And in many circles in the financial sector, cow lane is described as an alternative central bank. So you go to a bank or even a central bank, you don't have the documentation to transfer $1 million. Just walk down to car lane, the people will transfer it for you. But the point is that all the state officials, they are looking on. In fact, there are also even evidence that big people participate in what goes on in the cow lane. Okay. So for me, going forward, somebody made a point about research and data. We need to do more in terms of unearthing some of these issues, document them with concrete evidence and data, and then we use it for advocacy. But as we do the advocacy, we should bear in mind that there is this culture of touch and go in Ghana. We should break it and make sure that if there's one issue that we tackle it to a point where the politicians have nowhere to hide. They will just do what civil society want them to do. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you so very much to all of you, and to you, Dr. Kobina Nyaku Otu, Director, Labor Research and Policy Institute. That was really insightful. Ajua as well. Thank you. Kojo Opoku, thank you also very much. I'm going to invite Madam Patricia Blankson-Akapo to give us the next steps about this project.
Thank you, Shamima. Thank you, speakers, and thank you to all those who had time to join us on this webinar. We are so grateful. So as next steps, what I mentioned earlier, it's a 3-year project and we'll have different conversations. We are hoping to keep having conversations online around key tax issues and on this project. And then also we've already had trainings for media persons and civil society organizations. And one of the things that we want to do with those that have been trained is they developed action plans. We are going to follow up with them so that we can implement some of the interventions that they want to implement on this project, and also have conversations across the country, raising tax champions that will follow the issues critically and make interventions. So these are some of the things that the project will look at. Thank you again for joining. Please kindly put on your video so that we can take a group picture.
One last group photo.
I hope we have all completed the registration form. Please, can we all put on the cameras so that we can take a photo?
I can't see my camera here. So.
All right. Thank you once again, everybody, for joining the webinar as well. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Shamima. Thank you all. Thank you, our speakers. We are most grateful.
So everybody will be able to put on their, some people had earlier said they will not be able to. So
that's fine.
I don't have the icon to put on my camera.
Unfortunately, we cannot see our cameras on our screen. Somehow, we cannot see the button to our cameras on our screens.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Which is strange.
Yeah, this is strange as well. I have been also looking for it.
Okay, it's okay. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
That was the right side. Some people can leave. You just leave.
Hey, Kate, do I do? Hey, mwenele mgbe aka. Well, I just need a register to join Impress. So Impress and
So you don't know that there's something wrong?
no, I didn't know. So just a few minutes ago, Nigo, Makweno Niano. So I open, I've been AAB registered members. Please register. Netright, Patricia. The Netright, I'm a Jamie, I'm a platform. A war can registered affirmative action bill registered members. Affirmative
Auntie Kate,
action
we've not taken you out of the Netright platform. Maybe you've dropped out, so you just have to alert us if you are not receiving information from us so that we can add you.